The recording had been playing for 11 seconds when Simone Carter stopped speaking. Her hands went to her lap. Her eyes closed. Jimmy Fallon couldn't hold back his tears as a voice filled Studio 6B that none of them had expected to hear again. A voice the world lost in 2018. Singing in a way the world never got to hear. It was Aretha Franklin. Not the legend, not the icon. Before all of that, just her voice, in a church basement in Detroit, in 1966, singing for no one but God and whoever happened to be in the room. Simone Carter put both hands over her face. She didn't make a sound for a very long time. It was a Monday night in late September. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon was filming at Studio 6B at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, and everything was going exactly as planned. The guest that night was Simone Carter, the woman Aretha Franklin had called, publicly at a concert in Detroit in 1967, "My Daughter in Music." The Proc. The Keeper. One of the last people alive who had known Aretha before Aretha was Aretha. 300 people had come to be close to something they had lost. The Roots were in their corner, quieter than usual, as though the room itself had asked for it. Questlove's sticks rested across his snare between segments rather than moving, which almost never happens. The audience was still in the particular way that grief makes people still, not restless, not fidgeting, just present, hands in laps, waiting. Jimmy Fallon came out and the room softened rather than erupted. He was careful, gentle, the way he gets when the night calls for something other than energy. He said something about Simone that made the audience nod rather than laugh, which was exactly right. Then Simone Carter walked out. 74 years old, carrying herself the way people do when they have decided that elegance is a form of respect for those who can no longer be in the room. The audience applauded with the warmth you give someone you are grateful is still here. She sat. She and Jimmy talked. She was funny and warm and specific the way people who knew Aretha tend to be. Full of details, laughter always right next to something else. She talked about what it had been like. What it was still like. Jimmy was listening the way he listens when he forgets he's on television. Everything was flowing exactly as it should. Then, from the speakers above the stage, a sound. Not loud. Not announced. Just a voice. Beginning mid-phrase. The way voices begin when a recording has been running for a while before anyone presses play in the right room. It was a woman singing gospel. The recording was old, you could hear it in the texture of the sound, the slight compression of analog tape, the ambient noise of a room that was not built for acoustics. A church basement, or something close to it. Wooden floors. A piano slightly out of tune. And the voice. Simone Carter stopped speaking. She didn't look toward the speakers. She didn't look at Jimmy. She went very still the way a person goes still when something reaches them below the level of language. Below the level of response, in the part of the body that recognizes before the mind catches up. Jimmy Fallon saw it happen. He stopped too. He set down the card he'd been holding, and he put both hands flat on his desk and he did not say a word. Because some instincts are older than television and his told him, do not interrupt this. The voice kept singing. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1965. Aretha Franklin wasn't always Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul. In the autumn of 1965, she was 23 and not yet what the world would come to know her as. 4 years of Columbia Records, albums that contained unmistakable evidence of the voice, but the world hadn't agreed on what to do with her. The Atlantic deal, Jerry Wexler, respect, none of that existed yet. What existed was the voice. And the church. She had grown up in the church, C.L. Franklin's New Bethel Baptist in Detroit, singing there since before she could reach the microphone without a step stool. When sessions felt like someone else's direction, she came back. To Detroit. to the music that had been hers before anyone else had an opinion about it. In October of 1965, Walter Briggs was the sound technician at a small community church in the North End of Detroit. 26 years old, careful and quiet, with a second-hand Ampex reel-to-reel he had saved 2 years to buy. He used it to record Sunday sermons for congregation members who couldn't attend. Not a music man. A man who understood that sound was worth preserving. On a Wednesday evening that October, Aretha Franklin came to that church to rehearse. Not a performance, she came to sing in a room that felt like hers, with a piano tuned that morning at her request. No one around except the piano player and a few congregation members who happened to be there and stayed. Walter Briggs was there because he was always there. Something told him. The instinct that makes certain people reach for a camera at the right moment. He pressed record. He recorded 47 minutes of Aretha Franklin singing gospel in a church basement alone, before the world knew her name. He did not tell anyone. It hadn't occurred to him that it required telling. He labeled the canister, Aretha, Wed, Oct No 2 Church, and put it in a box in the closet of the house where he had lived for 51 years. He played it once a year, on August 16th, the day she died, and then he put it back. Now he was 84 years old and he was not well. In the spring of this year, his granddaughter Maya drove him to Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. The diagnosis was not a surprise. Walter was 84 and had not been well. But the word the oncologist used was clear. Stage 4. 5 months perhaps. Walter Briggs went home. He sat in the kitchen. He looked at the closet where the box was. Then he called Maya back into the room and told her about the tape. Maya listened. Then Maya did what her generation does, she found a way. She located an audio archivist in Detroit who still worked with analog tape. She had the recording digitized over 2 sessions. The original reel-to-reel preserved exactly. Every artifact of the room intact. And then she wrote a letter to The Tonight Show. She explained who her grandfather was. About the Wednesday in 1965, the rehearsal, the reel-to-reel, the 47 minutes. She explained that Simone Carter had been there that evening. 19 years old, in the third pew, one of the congregation members who stayed. And that she had never, in 57 years, heard a recording of what she had heard that night. The Tonight Show called Maya back within 48 hours. Walter Briggs did not feel well enough to attend. He watched from home, in Detroit, on his television. In the chair by the window where he always watched television, with Maya beside him. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Behind the scenes, Jimmy Fallon had made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. He had insisted the recording be played without introduction, without warning, without any signal to Simone Carter that it was coming, because the most honest moment happens before the mind has a chance to prepare. Let her hear it the way she would have heard it walking into that church basement after 57 years, the music simply there. The Tonight Show production team had spent 3 days ensuring the audio quality was right. Not cleaned up, not enhanced, but present. The ambient noise of the room, the piano's slight imperfection, the texture of the tape. They wanted the basement to be in the room. Simone Carter did not know this was coming. She was mid-sentence, talking about something Aretha had said to her once. Something funny. The audience was already smiling, when the sound came through the speakers. Now in Studio 6B, Simone Carter was hearing Aretha Franklin's voice from 1965 for the first time in 57 years. And only 5 people in the building knew what they were listening to. The voice filled the room the way certain voices fill rooms, not by being loud, but by being complete. Every note certain, every breath intentional. The piano underneath, slightly flat on the upper register. The resonance of a church basement, low ceilings, wooden floors, underneath everything. Simone Carter's hands were in her lap. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. She began to cry. Not the way people cry on television. She cried the way people cry when something opens a part of them that has been closed for a long time, without asking permission. Her shoulders came forward. Her face went down toward her hands. And the sound she made was not a sob. Something quieter. Something that had been waiting 57 years for this particular room. The entire studio froze. Jimmy Fallon had both hands pressed against his mouth. His eyes were full. He was not moving. He understood, with every instinct that had been built by 1,000 nights on that stage, that what was happening in the chair beside his desk was sacred, and was not his to touch. The recording played for 3 minutes and 40 seconds. No one in Studio 6B moved for any of it. When it ended, the silence that followed was the kind of silence that is not empty. It was full of everything the room had just held. Simone Carter lifted her head. Her face was wet. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, the way people look at the ceiling when they are trying to find something. And then she looked at Jimmy Fallon and she said, very quietly, she never sang like that in public. Her voice barely above a whisper, but caught perfectly by her microphone. Jimmy said, I know. She said that was just for God. He said, and for Walter. Simone Carter looked at him. She hadn't been told that name yet. Jimmy picked up a piece of paper from his desk. Steadily, his voice breaking once and then holding, he explained who Walter Briggs was. 26 years old in a church basement with an Ampex machine. 57 years of keeping it in a box. The penciled label, Aretha, wed, Oct No 2 Church. 84 now stage 4, watching on television from Detroit. Simone Carter pressed both hands flat on the desk between them and bowed her head, and did not speak for a long time. Then she looked at the camera directly. Not at Jimmy, at the camera. She said, Walter. She said, thank you for being in the room. Jimmy Fallon left his desk. He walked around it slowly and sat down in the empty guest chair that had been placed beside Simone for a planned segment later in the show. He sat beside her rather than across from her, and he put his hand over hers on the desk, and neither of them said anything. Questlove set his sticks down on the drumhead very carefully, like he was setting something fragile down. And then he sat. The camera operator in the center of the floor held on both of them, Simone and Jimmy, side by side, and the director in the booth let it hold as long as it needed to hold. After a while Jimmy said, Can we play it again? Simone Carter nodded. They played it again. The whole 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Aretha's voice from 1965 in a church basement in Detroit. Filling Studio 6B at 30 Rockefeller Plaza on a Monday night in late September, while Simone Carter sat with Jimmy Fallon's hand over hers and listened to the woman who had called her daughter. Questlove was crying. The floor manager was crying, a woman in the fourth row who had come because she loved Aretha Franklin's music, and had never expected this, was holding both her own hands against her heart, leaning forward, eyes closed. 300 people sat in complete silence, and let themselves grieve something they had not known they were still carrying. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. When it ended the second time, the applause that came was slow and full and did not sound like applause. It sounded like what it was, 300 people saying, in the only language the moment allowed, that they had heard something real and were grateful to have been in the room when it happened. Jimmy Fallon stood. He walked back behind his desk and stood there rather than sitting. He looked out at the audience and he said, Some things don't belong to us. Some things just pass through us on their way to wherever they're going. Tonight something passed through this room. He looked at Simone. He said thank you for being her daughter. Simone Carter smiled. The full kind. The kind that arrives after crying and is different from the kind before. She said. She made it easy. After the camera stopped, Simone Carter sat in that studio for a long time. She asked them to play the recording one more time for the people in the room. The Roots played along softly in the final minute, Questlove barely touching the kit, the others finding the edges of the sound without disturbing it. Nobody filmed it. It existed only for the people in that room, which was how it had always been meant to exist. 2 days after the taping, a package arrived at Simone Carter's home in Atlanta. Inside was a round metal canister, the kind used for reel-to-reel tape, slightly dented on one edge. A piece of masking tape on the lid, with handwriting in pencil. Aretha, wed. Oct. No church. Walter Briggs had sent her the original. Walter Briggs passed away 11 weeks after the taping, at home in Detroit in the chair by the window, with Maya beside him. He had watched the episode 4 times. Maya said he hadn't said much about it. He watched it, sat quietly for a while, and then said, "Good. That is all." Good, the original tape canister, Aretha, wed. Oct. No to church. Pencil still clear, dent on one edge, sits now in a display case at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. On permanent loan from Simone Carter, who asked only that the card beside it carry Walter Briggs's name above her own. Every August 16th, the day Aretha Franklin died, Simone Carter plays the recording in whatever room she wakes up in that morning. Not on speakers, on headphones, just for herself. The way Walter kept it. The way it was always meant to be kept. Not for the world. Not for the cameras. Not for any of this. Because kindness echoes. And sometimes a man alone in a room with a machine makes a decision in 10 seconds. That takes 57 years to reach the person it was always meant for. Some recordings wait a lifetime for the right room. This one found it.